The world did not fall in a single day. It was conquered slowly, decree by decree, banquet by banquet, until power ceased to be a sword and became a habit. In Susa, capital of the Persian Empire, the sun did not rise by its own will. It rose each morning like a punctual servant, obedient, illuminating a kingdom that stretched from India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces united not by loyalty, but by fear. The entire world fit into a single name, Ahasuerus, King of Kings. Absolute power, however, has a fatal flaw: it grows bored. And when the most powerful man on earth grows bored, the world trembles. Ahasuerus ruled from palaces of marble and gold, surrounded by invincible armies and countless treasures, yet no conquest managed to fill the emptiness that lived within him. The empire was his, and yet it felt distant, abstract, like a cold map beneath his feet. He needed to see it, to touch it, to let the world know it was trapped in his hand. Thus excess was born. Thus the feast was born. For 180 days, Susa became an open wound of luxury. Wine spilled like blood, gold wasted like sand, bodies intoxicated by power and obedience. Princes, satraps, and generals were summoned from the far reaches of the empire to behold the magnitude of a king who knew no limits. And in the end, when everything had been shown, when nothing remained to be displayed, the king made a mistake. The refusal of one woman, the Queen Vashti, was enough to crack the entire structure of power. In a single night, the empire discovered that absolute authority could be challenged. And to erase that fracture, Ahasuerus issued a law that would change the fate of millions. A queen was erased from history. And a throne was left empty. To fill it, the empire moved again. Not with armies, but with grasping hands, with decrees that tore daughters from their fathers' arms. From all the provinces, beautiful young women were taken, harvested like silent spoils for the king's desire. Among them was an orphaned girl, without a crown and without a name of her own. A foreigner, a Jew. Her name was Esther. She did not arrive at the palace to rule. She arrived to survive. She brought no ambition, no lineage, no voice. Only a secret buried in her chest and a simple command: remain silent. But in an empire built on arrogance, silence can become a weapon. And in a world where men believe they write history, sometimes it is an invisible woman who changes its course. This is not a story of invincible heroes. It is the story of a power that believed itself eternal, of an ancient hatred that awakened once more, and of a decision, taken in silence, that confronted an entire empire. For when power becomes blind, history does not always shout. Sometimes, it whispers. Esther, the woman who put an empire in check. In Susa, capital of the world, jewel of the Medo-Persian Empire, the sun was not a god. It was a servant. It rose lazily each morning over the jagged, purple peaks of the Zagros Mountains, and its first light did not dare touch the glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate without the permission of Ahasuerus. The light spilled first over the vast, parched plains, illuminating the golden dust stirred up by camel caravans bringing ivory from Kush and the barges struggling upstream on the Choaspes River, laden with Egypt's vital grain. The morning air in the lower city smelled of dust, the dung of 1,000 beasts, and the acrid smoke of 10,000 cooking fires baking barley bread. But within the walls of the Acropolis, in the royal citadel, the air was different. It smelled of cold stone, of the cypresses of the hanging gardens, and of the constant whisper of water. Water, in that dry land, was the very scent of power. Channeled through underground aqueducts, the Khanats, it was the blood that kept that artificial paradise alive. Ahasuerus, whom the Greek annals, in their barbarous tongue, would call Xerxes, was a man who measured his life in horizons. In the 3rd year of his reign, he awoke in his summer chamber, a vast hall with high ceilings where air currents stirred linen curtains. The silence of the royal morning was broken only by the buzz of a lone fly and the monotonous voice of Harbona, his chief eunuch, reading the night's reports. Tribute from Sardis, my lord, 200 talents of gold, 100 of silver. Minor revolt in Bactria, suppressed. 500 crucified as a warning. The price of grain in Babylon has risen 2%. The satrap of Ionia reports that the Athenians. Ahasuerus raised a hand. Harbona's voice stopped instantly. The king stood and walked barefoot across the lapis lazuli floor, a map of his world carved in stone. The floor was cold beneath his feet, cold and inert. He stopped over the province of Lydia. 200 talents of gold. It was a number, a word in the mouth of a eunuch. Power was an abstraction. It was a list of collected taxes, a map, a report of revolts crushed 1,000 leagues away. It was a fact, but not a feeling. He possessed the map, but he could not feel the territory. He was a prisoner at the pinnacle of his own creation, an eye that saw everything but touched nothing. A colossal boredom, a void as vast as the empire itself, gnawed at him from within. He had conquered all that his fathers had left him, and now, what? He turned toward the window. He saw the sun, his servant, climbing the sky. Harbona, he said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. my lord? I wish to see my reflection. The silver mirror is. No, Ahasuerus cut him off. Not in metal. I want to see my reflection in the eyes of my subjects. I want the empire to stop being a report and become a spectacle. I want the satraps of India to see the princes of Ethiopia, and for both to tremble as they understand the cage in which they live. He paused, a monstrous and magnificent idea blooming in his mind. We will summon a feast. Harbona paled. A banquet, my lord? For the court? No. Ahasuerus smiled. A feast. For the satraps. For the governors. For the princes and the generals. For the 127 provinces. All of them. Here, in Susa. My lord, the logistics, that would take. Let it take whatever it must take, Ahasuerus decreed, his boredom evaporating, replaced by the fire of a divine whim. Let them see the power of Persia. Let them see what I can spend, what I can waste. Demonstration of force disguised as hospitality. The machinery of the empire groaned and turned on a single axis, the celebration of itself. The first 30 days, the satraps of the east arrived, Parthia, Bactria, Sogdiana. Men with skin weathered by the steppe wind, who smelled of horse and leather. They arrived bearing gifts of turquoise and wild stallions. They sat stiffly on golden couches, uncomfortable, their eyes bulging at the casual luxury. They drank the thick wine of Cyprus, and their minds calculated. The wine of this single day could pay my garrison for a month. The next 30 days, the princes of Babylon and the merchants of Tyre arrived. Soft men, accustomed to luxury, yet even they were unprepared. They brought purple fabrics and knowledge of astronomy. And so it continued. The awe of the first month turned into gluttony by the third. Gluttony turned into stupor by the fifth. By the 6th month, Susa had become a hell of luxury. The opulence was so vast, so relentless, that it became suffocating. The air. Oh, the air of Susa. In the morning, it smelled of freshly baked bread from 1,000 clay ovens and of olive oil perfumed with which the guests were anointed. At midday, the scent changed, the dense, greasy smoke of 100 oxen roasting whole in the kitchen courtyards. The sharp smell of saffron and cumin. The sweet aroma of melons brought on ice from the mountains. At night, the air turned rancid. It smelled of spilled wine souring in the mosaics, of overcooked meat, of the heavy perfumes of Lydian courtesans, and beneath it all, the stench of overflowing latrines and the sweat of thousands of terrified servants running with silver trays, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep. They burned myrrh and galbanum in bronze braziers on every corner, not out of piety, but to mask the rot of so much excess. The sound was a cacophony. 100 different languages fighting to be heard over the music of flutes, lyres, and drums. The roar of drunken laughter, the clash of golden cups, the occasional shout of a dispute that ended with a swift movement of the king's guards and a body discreetly dragged away. And Ahasuerus watched. He sat on his elevated couch, drinking little, his dark eyes fixed. He saw the satraps boast, grow drunk, form alliances and betray them in the same night. And he saw his reflection. He saw it in the trembling hand of a general accepting a cup of solid gold. He saw it in the silence of a prince from India when he realized the floor beneath his feet was worth more than his palace. The men spoke of conquests, of Greece, of punishing Athens for the affront of Marathon. But their voices grew thick, their eyes empty. Opulence was a weapon. By the 180th day, these men were broken. They were drowned in luxury. They were ready to obey. The winter palace was a marvel, but its garden, the Pardes, was the heart of the display. There, where shade-planed trees with trunks mottled like a serpent's skin offered respite from the Persian sun that struck like a hammer, the king ordered his open-air banquet hall erected for the final celebration. Columns of white marble, brought by barge from the quarries of Paros, polished by slaves until they resembled solid ice, supported a temporary sky. Between them, to filter the brutal light, hung curtains of cottony white, so fine one could see the sun through them like a blurred gold coin. Beside them hung draperies of royal violet, the purple of Tyre, a color so obscenely expensive that its weight was worth more than gold. The faint, briny scent of the sea, of the thousands of murex snails boiled to dye a single garment, still clung to the fabric. They were fastened with cords of fine linen braided with threads of purple, passing through rings of solid silver. The floor was not stone. It was an intricate mosaic of red porphyry, like congealed blood, of alabaster, shining with a milky light, of mother of pearl, which caught the evening light and shattered it into 1,000 rainbows. The couches on which princes and nobles reclined were of solid gold and pure silver, cold to the touch even in the heat of the day. Upon them, cushions were embroidered with threads of incalculable value. And the wine, served in golden cups, each one, by royal decree, of a unique design. One was shaped like a lion's head, another was inlaid with turquoise. It was another display of power. Ahasuerus had so much gold he had no need for the efficiency of repetition. And it flowed without measure. The rule of Ahasuerus was the absence of rules. This was not generosity, it was a test of endurance. The royal cellar, vast as an underground city, bled its finest vintages. On the 7th day of the final feast, a week-long celebration for the people of Susa alone, a political gesture to secure the capital's loyalty, the king's heart was merry with wine. It is a euphemism. The most powerful man in the world was bloated with alcohol, with flattery, with ego. It was 7 in the evening of the 187th day of feasting. He was in a state of near divine narcissism. He had displayed his armies, his horses, his treasures. The men around him were drunk, their faces gleaming with sweat and wine. A prince of Media, drunk, raised his cup. King of kings, you have everything. The world is yours. There is nothing you do not possess. Ahasuerus smiled, and at that moment, his drunken mind stumbled upon one final thought. There remained one thing, his most precious possession, the jewel of his collection. He wanted the crowning touch. He wanted the final ovation. They are right, he roared, his slurred voice silencing the musicians. But you have seen nothing yet. You have not seen my greatest treasure. You have not seen Queen Vashti. Vashti was famous. Her beauty was not a rumor, it was a law of nature. She was a princess of blood, as noble as he, descended from the royal line. While Ahasuerus feasted with the men in the garden, a din of belches, shouts, and metal on metal, Vashti held a separate banquet for the women in the royal house. It was a different world. There, the air smelled of nard and saffron, not sour wine. The sound was that of the santar, the Persian dulcimer, whose notes fell like cool water, and the whispers of women. Hundreds of wives and daughters of Persian nobles reclined on silk cushions, dressed in diaphanous tunics. But Vashti's banquet was not merely social. It was political. It was the true center of power in Susa. Here, with a quiet word to a general's wife or a smile to a satrap's mother, Vashti wove the web of alliances that held the empire together. She was stability, he was force. The king's order, carried by his 7 trusted eunuchs, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, and the others, men without futures of their own who lived by the king's mood, was brutal in its simplicity. Bring Queen Vashti before me, the king roared. With the royal crown upon her head, I wish to show the peoples and the princes her beauty. The order was a blow. Alone, to the banquet of drunken men, crowned not as his wife, but as his foremost object. He wanted her to stand at the center of the mosaic while 1,000 pairs of eyes stripped her bare, and for them to see that this, too, belonged to him. The order traveled. The 7 eunuchs walked from the stifling heat and noise of the garden to the refined murmur and cool air of the women's hall. Silence fell over Vashti's banquet as they entered. The santar's music stopped on a sharp note. Mehuman, the chief eunuch, sweat beading on his brow, prostrated himself. Queen of queens, light of Persia, the king of kings, your lord, summons you. He decrees that you come before him, wearing the royal crown, so that the peoples and the princes may behold your beauty. Vashti, reclining on her own silver couch, did not move. The air around her seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every woman in the hall watched her. She entered the palace of her mind. She knew what it meant. She could hear, far off, the animal roar of the men's feast. She could smell the smoke of burning meat. To show your beauty, it meant becoming a trophy. It meant standing before drunken satraps, before sweating generals who would appraise her like a horse. It meant losing, in an instant, all the political authority she had built. It meant telling all those noble women that, in the end, they were nothing more than their husband's property, regardless of blood or intellect. It was pride. It was dignity. It was a political calculation. If she went, she lost her power. If she did not go, she lost everything else. She chose her dignity. She lifted her chin. Her dark eyes settled on Mehuman. Her no was not a cry of rage. It was a declaration of being. Tell the king, she said, her voice calm but harder than marble, that Queen Vashti refuses to come. The eunuchs recoiled as if struck. They prostrated themselves and withdrew, walking backward in terror. The word returned to the king. Mehuman, trembling so violently he could barely speak, knelt before Ahasuerus' throne. My king, the queen, she, refuses. The silence that fell over the men's banquet was heavier than all the gold of Persia. It was a thick, suffocating silence. The wine soured in their mouths. The musicians stilled their lyres. Servants froze, pitchers half poured. A prince dropped his cup, and the sound of gold striking mosaic thundered through the space. King Ahasuerus, the man who commanded 127 provinces, could not command his own wife. His face, already flushed with wine, passed through shades of confusion, disbelief, and then a fury nearly divine in its magnitude. It darkened to a mottled purple. Veins throbbed at his temples. The public humiliation was absolute. The mirror he had raised to see his power reflected had spat in his face. His counselors, the wise men who knew the times, panicked. They glanced at one another, pale with fear. The king's wrath was a force of nature, and they stood in its path. Memujan, lowest in rank but quickest to speak, saw the vacuum of power. Perhaps he hated Vashti. Perhaps his wife had been slighted by her. He saw an opportunity. King of kings, live forever, he declared, his voice ringing in the tense silence. He diverted the personal offense and turned it into a matter of state. It was political brilliance. Queen Vashti has not only offended the king, he cried. She has offended all the princes and all the peoples. For this deed of the queen will reach the ears of all women, and make them look with contempt upon their husbands. He turned to the other princes, his eyes seeking support. They will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media who hear of this will speak the same way to all the king's princes. There will be contempt, there will be wrath, it will be anarchy. It was a matter of control. The empire rested on absolute obedience. Vashti's rebellion was a crack in the very structure of power. The solution was swift and cold as steel. If it pleased the king, let a royal edict go forth from him, and let it be written among the laws of Persia and Media, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and that the king shall give her royal position to another who is better than she. The king, in his fury, barely listened. He heard the words edict, law, and another better. It was a solution. It was action. He nodded sharply. Letters were sent. Scribes were roused from sleep. By torchlight, their pens scraped parchment. The smell of ink and hot wax filled the air. The king, still drunk, pressed his signet ring into the molten seal. The message, written in every language and script, was clear. Vashti was deposed, and every man was to be master in his own house. Vashti vanished. The chronicles do not say how, whether she was exiled, executed, or simply confined in the old palace. She became a ghost, a lesson. And so, in the heart of the most powerful empire on earth, amid the most decadent opulence, a void was created. The throne beside Ahasuerus was cold. Time passed. Time, in the palace of Susa, was not measured in days, but in the king's mood. There was the time of fury, which lasted 7 days. Then came the time of administration, which lasted 30 days, while couriers carried the edict against Vashti to the farthest reaches of the empire. And then, the time of emptiness began. The storm of Ahasuerus's wrath, that hurricane which had uprooted a queen and made every household tremble, finally subsided. The waves of fury receded. And in the calm that followed, in the stillness of his vast chambers, Ahasuerus remembered Vashti. He did not remember her with love, for a man like Ahasuerus was scarcely capable of loving anything that was not a reflection of himself. He remembered her with the discomfort of an amputation. He remembered her as a gap in his routine. He would wake, and the bed beside him was cold and empty. He would walk to the throne room, and the queen's throne to his right, smaller but equally ornate, stood empty. Dust began to gather on its ivory armrests. He would hold a lesser banquet, and her absence, her dignity, her silent control of the court, the way her presence balanced his brutality, created an uncomfortable silence. When the fog of his fury and the hangover of 6 months of wine lifted, he realized his mistake. Not the mistake of deposing her, but the mistake of legislating it. The edict, written into the immutable laws of Persia, had imprisoned him. He could not forgive her. He could not bring her back. His own power had made him a prisoner of his own wrath. The emptiness beside him became palpable, and with the emptiness came melancholy. A royal melancholy, heavy and dangerous, that spread through the palace like a cold mist. His servants, the eunuchs and courtiers who lived and died by the tides of his mood, saw it. They saw the monarch's lost gaze, his sudden lack of appetite, his irritability. And they were afraid. A melancholy king was an unpredictable king. They saw an opportunity, not for reconciliation, but for distraction, for replacement. It was the chamber servants, the ones who dressed him in the morning, who first dared to speak. Light of the world, king of kings, suggested Mehuman the eunuch, his voice soft and oily. The past is stone, but the future is clay. The queen's throne must not remain empty. The king is alone. Why should the sovereign of the world be alone? The idea, like a seed, fell into the fertile soil of Ahasuerus's wounded ego. What do you suggest? The king murmured, without taking his eyes from the empty garden. Another political alliance. Another arrogant princess to challenge me. Another Vashti? No, my lord, Harbona intervened. No politics. Pleasure. Why choose one? Why limit yourself to the nobility? The empire is your garden. Why not harvest its most beautiful flowers? The idea took shape. Let the king appoint commissioners, they continued, in all the provinces of his kingdom. Let them gather all the beautiful young women, virgins, fair to look upon. Let them bring them to Susa, to the citadel, to the house of the women, under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women. And let them give them their adornments and their oils of purification. The idea was a bomb. Ahasuerus would not choose a wife. He would harvest one. The empire, once again, would provide for him. His harem would be replenished with the beauty of 127 provinces. It would be a parade. It would be a contest. And in the end, he would choose the most docile, the most beautiful, one who owed him everything, who possessed no noble blood of her own, no political power. One who would never, ever dare to say, no. Let it be done, said the king, and the first spark of interest returned to his eyes. The decree was issued, and what for the palace was a hunt for beauty became, for the provinces, a season of fear. In the villages of the mountains of Media, in the port cities of Ionia, in the adobe towns of Bactria, the king's commissioners did not ask. They took. To be beautiful, once a blessing, a promise of a good bride price, had become a mortal danger. Cries were heard in the night. Doors were barred at dusk. Fathers covered their daughters' faces with mud, cut their hair, dressed them in rags. Dowries were paid hastily to marry off the most beautiful. For a married woman, the property of another man could not be taken. But the commissioners were efficient. Their eyes were trained. They arrived with soldiers, with a census list. Eliab's daughter. Where is she? The census says she is 15. She has gone, my lord, to visit her aunt. Search the house. It was the king's harvest. A procession of covered carts, filled with weeping, began its long journey toward Susa. In the city of Susa itself, in the dusty alleys that crouched in the shadow of the palace's marble walls, lived a man named Mordecai. He did not live in the citadel. He lived in the lower city, where the air smelled of ground spices, tanned leather, and humanity. He was a Jew, of the tribe of Benjamin, a descendant of those whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried captive from Jerusalem generations before. Mordecai was a man of dualities. To the Persians, he was a minor official, a low-level administrator who sat at the king's gate. The gate was the nerve center of the palace, a place of passage, petitions, news, and minor power. It was where whispers were heard. Mordecai, with his impassive face and attentive eyes, heard everything. He spoke 7 languages, read 4 scripts. He was useful, and therefore invisible. But in his home, Mordecai was something else. He was a scholar, a guardian of stories, a Jew. His identity was a secret treasure, and also a dangerous ember, which he kept hidden beneath the robe of his Persian service. And Mordecai was not alone. He had raised his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. Her parents had died in one of the fevers that swept through Susa, leaving her like an orphaned twig. The girl's Hebrew name was Hadassah, which means myrtle, a humble shrub with dark leaves and white, fragrant flowers, a desert plant that blooms against all odds. But the Persian world had no patience for Hebrew names. The world knew her by her Persian name, Esther. Esther was of beautiful figure and pleasing appearance. It was not the flashy beauty of a courtesan. It was a disarming grace, a stillness in her dark eyes that drew the gaze. There was in her a quiet dignity, a well of depth. When she walked to the well with the jar upon her head, men did not shout obscenities at her. They lowered their eyes, unsettled by her modesty. Mordecai had raised her as his own daughter, with a mixture of fierce love and constant fear. He had wrapped her in the stories of his people, of Abraham, of Moses, of David. He had taught her the faith of a God who had no face and no temple in Susa, a God worshipped in whispers, in the observance of the new moons and in the refusal to eat the impure meat of the market. She was the last remnant of his family line, a secret treasure in a foreign land. And he loved her with a protective terror. When the king's decree to gather the virgins was proclaimed in Susa, Mordecai's heart did not merely grow cold. It shattered. He could hide her from the commissioners of the provinces. But now the search was beginning in Susa itself. The king's eyes were everywhere. The commissioners, with their tablets and guards, went from house to house. It's the census, Mordecai, a neighbor said to him at the door. They're registering all unmarried young women. For the king's house. That night, Mordecai did not sleep. He sat in his small courtyard beneath the myrtle he himself had planted. He looked at Esther, sleeping unaware of the danger. What do I do? His mind raced, desperate. Do I marry her tonight? To whom? The baker's son? There is no time. Do I hide her? In the cellar? They will find her. They will smell her. Run? Where? They would hunt us like dogs before we reached the river. His inner monologue was a circle of panic. There was no escape. He was trapped between the empire and his love. The knock at the door came 3 days later. It was not a polite knock. It was the dull sound of the butt of a spear against wood. Mordecai opened. There were 3 men. 2 guards and a king's scribe, a minor eunuch with dead fish eyes. Mordecai, son of Jair, said the scribe, reading from his tablet. Resident of this district, the census indicates a young woman under your guardianship. Esther, unmarried, age 17. She is my daughter, Mordecai said, his voice rough. She is betrothed. She is not married, said the eunuch impatiently. He gestured. The guards pushed Mordecai aside. The eunuch entered the house. He saw Esther. She had risen, pale, her hands clasped. The eunuch looked at her. Not as a person. He looked at her as a horse buyer would. He saw her face, her figure, the grace of her terror. She will do, he said simply. Gather your things. You are coming with us. No, Mordecai cried, throwing himself at the eunuch's feet. Please, take my money. I have savings, silver, take it all. Do you dare bribe an officer of the king? The eunuch hissed. Keep your silver, Jew, or I will take it and take the girl anyway. She now belongs to the king. Mordecai ran beside her as they escorted her through the streets, from his small myrtle-scented courtyard toward the marble citadel. Panic choked him. He knew what awaited her. The preparation, the night with the king, and then, almost certainly, the rest of her life in the house of the concubines, a de facto widow, dead to the world. But there was an even greater danger. The Persian Empire was tolerant, but court politics were treacherous. The Jews were different, and difference was dangerous. He seized her arm at the last moment, before the guards shoved her through the bronze door of the harem, the door of the harvest. Hadassah, listen to me. Look at me, he ordered in a harsh, urgent Hebrew whisper. His face was distorted by terror. They're taking me. Uncle, I'm afraid, she sobbed, trying to cling to him. Listen, there is no time. He took her face in his hands. You are not Hadassah. Hadassah dies here, in this street. Do you understand? You are Esther. You are an orphan. You are Persian. Do you understand? I don't. Swear it. Your God, your people, bury them. Here, he struck his chest. In your heart. Let no one see anything. Nothing. It is your only chance to survive. Survive, Hadassah. That is all. Survive. Esther, terrified, split in two by the command, nodded. To live, she had to erase half of herself. She had to become Esther, the empty shell the king could fill with his desires. She watched as the door of the harem, the house of the women, closed with a metallic creak and the dull thud of a bar, leaving Mordecai outside in the dust, alone. He fell to his knees, and the first lament, a howl of pain, tore from his throat. Life in the harem, the house of the women, was a world unto itself, a golden prison of unbearable psychological claustrophobia. It was a silk cage filled with the most beautiful birds in the empire, and they all hated one another. And it was ruled with an iron hand by Hegai, the guardian eunuch. Hegai was a man who had seen everything. He was a hollow man, without past or future, whose present was entirely devoted to the king's taste. He had seen hundreds of women enter. He had seen very few succeed. He was a man with the pale, smooth skin of a child, but with eyes 1,000 years old. His power lay in his ability to guess the king's taste. He was the chief supplier of the most valuable commodity in the empire, the fantasy of Ahasuerus. Esther, along with 50 other virgins from the latest harvest, was brought before him. They stood trembling in a hall of cold marble. Hegai walked down the line. His silk sandals made almost no sound. He looked at each one. He saw a princess from Lydia, arrogant and defiant. Too proud, he murmured to an assistant. Like Vashti, put her at the back. He saw a girl from Babylon, crying hysterically. Too weak, she will break. Then he stopped in front of Esther. He lifted her chin with a cold finger. He looked at her. He saw her beauty, of course. But he also saw her stillness. There was no arrogance. There was no desperation. There was terror, yes, but it was contained. There was grace, a silent respect. A lack of demand. This one, Hegai thought, this one will not break. And she will not be a threat. Esther found favor in his eyes. Immediately, Hegai, the supreme bureaucrat of desire, made a wager. This one was different. He gave her preferential treatment. Take her to the northern chambers, he ordered. Give her the 7 best maidens. And give her the royal portion of food. Esther was taken to her new chambers. They were luxurious, but they were a cell. And the year of preparation began. 12 months. It was a ritual process of purification and beautification that bordered on depersonalization. 6 months of treatment with oil of myrrh. Myrrh, a bitter, fragrant resin, the same used to embalm the dead. The smell permeated everything. It was a thick, heavy scent that seeped into clothing, into hair, into the air. It was the smell of burial. The women were massaged with it for hours, their bodies rubbed until their skin was soft, but their minds dulled by the fragrance. It was the smell of the death of their former lives. Esther, in secret, struggled to maintain her identity. The royal food was brought to her, roasted lamb with spices, sweet wines, honey and pistachio pastries. She looked at the food. It was impure. It was the king's food. She remembered Mordecai. Do not eat from his table, he had once told her, so that you do not forget who you are. She called her chief maid. I have a weak stomach, she said, her voice soft. This food is too rich for me. Please bring me only vegetables, bread, and water. The maid, surprised by her humility, obeyed. It was her first secret act of rebellion. Her first act of being Hadassah. Then, 6 months with sweet perfumes, spices, and cosmetics. Jasmine oil, nard ointments, kohl for the eyes, henna for the hands. They were bathed, depilated, exfoliated, and anointed until their skin shone like satin. They learned to walk again, not as women, but as visions. They learned to speak in low voices, to play music, to be pleasing to the sight of a single man. It was an atmosphere of whispers and jealousy. The women, brought from all the provinces, formed alliances and rivalries. They spied on one another. What perfume was she wearing? I heard Hegai looked at her twice. She refuses to eat the king's food. How arrogant. The desperation to please the king, to have that single night, was a poison that corroded friendship. Esther, however, navigated this world with the wisdom of silence. Faithful to Mordecai's command, she remained silent about her origin. She was kind, she was compliant, but she was reserved. Her secret was an invisible wall around her. She asked for nothing. She did not take part in intrigues. She listened, she observed. Her humility, her refusal to compete, was so strange in that place of ambition that it became her greatest weapon. The other virgins, seeing that she was not a threat, left her alone. The eunuchs, seeing that she was not demanding, favored her. She gained the favor of all who saw her. Meanwhile, Mordecai, every day, walked back and forth in front of the courtyard of the house of the women. He could not enter. He could not see her. His post at the king's gate gave him an excuse to be near. His life had become a ritual of pain. He rose before dawn. He prayed, his face toward a Jerusalem he had never seen. And then he went to the gate. He sat at his post as an official, but his ears were not on the petitioners. They were trained to catch any sound from the harem. His presence was an anchor for her. She could not see him, but she knew he was there. She felt it. He questioned the guards, the servants. He bribed minor eunuchs with a copper coin. How is she? How is Esther doing? The answer was always the same. The new girl. Yes. Quiet. Hegai favors her. His vigilance was constant, a thread of loyalty that ran through the palace walls. Each day was an act of faith. Finally, the year ended. The procession began. Each night, a virgin was brought to the king. And each morning, that virgin was taken to the second house of the women, the house of the concubines, the place of the forgotten. None had been summoned a second time. Esther's turn came. Each virgin, when she was called, had the right to take with her whatever she wished. It was her only chance to dazzle. They asked for the rarest jewels, the finest silk dresses from China, veils embroidered in gold. They loaded themselves with trinkets, thinking that brilliance would make them memorable. When Esther was asked what she wished to take, she, the orphan, the hidden Jew, simply shook her head. She looked at Hegai, the eunuch who had observed her for a year. I ask for nothing, she said, her voice calm. I do not know what pleases the king. You do. I will take nothing except what Hegai, the guardian of the women, instructs me to take. It was a masterstroke of humility and intelligence. She trusted the expert. Hegai, moved by her trust and confident in his own choice, dressed her himself. He did not overload her. He saw the other women, who looked like overburdened Christmas trees. He chose simple white tunics, of the finest linen from Egypt. He enhanced her natural grace. He gave her pearls, not diamonds, pearls that caught the light of her dark eyes. When he finished, he looked at her, and for a moment, the appraiser saw beauty. That night, she was taken to the palace of Ahasuerus. She walked through the marble corridors, her heart beating like a bird trapped in her chest. The air smelled of wine and olive oil torches. The guards did not look at her. She was one more in the procession. She entered the royal chambers. The king, reclining on his purple cushions, looked at her. He was jaded. He had seen dozens of women in recent months. He was bored with beauty, bored with ambition, bored with desperation. They all smelled the same, they all moved the same, they all looked at him with the same hungry gaze. But when Esther entered, the air changed. She did not prostrate herself in abject fear, crawling on the floor. Nor did she strut with the arrogance learned in the harem. She simply stopped, at a respectful distance. She bowed her head, and she waited, a presence of silent dignity. The king, a man of vast appetites and profound boredom, sat up. He felt intrigued. Come closer, he said. She came closer. What is your name? They call me Esther, my lord. Her voice did not tremble. He spoke with her. He asked where she came from. She told him she was an orphan, from Susa. Her answers were brief, respectful, and asked for nothing. And for the first time in a long while, the king heard something other than the echo of his own desires. He saw a well of stillness and wanted to drink from it. It was not only lust. It was relief. King Ahasuerus loved Esther more than all the other women. She found grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins. The decision was instantaneous. Politics could wait. Lust could wait. He had found respite. He called his servants. Bring the royal crown. It was Vashti's crown, the same crown Vashti had refused to wear as a trophy. He took the heavy gold diadem and gently placed it upon Esther's head. The weight of the gold was sudden and cold, a weight that nearly made her stagger. He held a great banquet in Esther's honor. He decreed a day of celebration for the provinces and distributed gifts with the generosity of a king in love. Hadassah, the orphaned Jewish girl, was now Esther, queen of Persia and Media. The secret of her identity was buried beneath a crown. And Mordecai, her cousin, her adoptive father, her only link to reality, remained seated at the king's gate, watching. The golden trap had closed. An empire does not stop for a coronation. Affairs of state, intrigues, border wars, and personal ambitions continued to flow like subterranean rivers beneath the marble of Susa. Esther, now queen, discovered the truth of power. It was a cage of unimaginable loneliness. Her life, once defined by danger and preparation, was now defined by waiting. She was confined to the royal house, a bubble of luxury even more isolated than Hegai's harem. Her chambers were vast. The floors were polished cedar, covered with silk carpets so fine her bare feet could scarcely feel them. The air always smelled of nard and orange blossom, a sweet, constant fragrance that, as the weeks passed, began to smell to her like confinement. She learned the rules of her new life: smile, agree, be beautiful, and above all, wait to be summoned. King Ahasuerus was a man of vast appetites and deep boredom. In the first weeks, he summoned her often. He was captivated by her stillness. But a king does not love silence for long. He loves the echo of his own power. And Esther, faithful to Mordecai's command, remained silent about her past, about her people, about her soul. She became a beautiful enigma, and the king, unable to solve it, began to grow bored of it. Days became weeks. Weeks became a month. 30 days. 30 days in which the king did not summon her. Esther sat by her window, which overlooked a private garden where only she was permitted to walk. From afar she heard the roar of court life, the music of banquets to which she was not invited, the sound of messengers' horses bringing news from an empire she could not touch. The weight of Vashti's crown, which she wore only on official occasions, seemed to sit upon her head even when she did not wear it. It was a cold circle of gold. Where was Vashti? No one knew. The former queen had become a ghost, a lesson whispered among the maid servants. And Esther, in those 30 days of silence, felt that she too was beginning to fade. The king's favor was the sun. Without it, everything turned cold and gray. She was becoming the next Vashti. It was in this time of Esther's growing loneliness that a shadow began to grow over the palace. A man named Haman, an Agagite. This title, Agagite, was not merely a name. It was a historical scar. To the Persians, it meant nothing, a tribal title from some dark corner of the empire. But to Mordecai, still seated at the gate, it meant everything. Haman was a descendant of Agag, king of the Amalekites. Amalek, the people who had attacked the Israelites in the wilderness, striking the stragglers, the weak, the women and the children, the first and most bitter enemies of Mordecai's people. For a Jew, Amalek was not a political enemy. It was the symbol of irrational, genocidal hatred, an evil so pure that God himself had commanded its memory be erased. And Haman was the embodiment of pathological arrogance. He was a tall man of imposing presence, with a curly black beard perfumed with lotus oil, and dark eyes that never smiled. He possessed a dark charisma that drew weak men and a contempt for morality that King Ahasuerus, in his caprice, found entertaining. Haman was, above all, efficient. He was ruthless. He got things done. A revolt in Lydia? Haman suggested not only crucifying the leaders, but decimating the village and selling its women as slaves. A deficit in the treasury? Haman devised a new tax on funerals. Ahasuerus, fundamentally lazy and devoted to pleasure, loved Haman. Haman saved him the work of ruling. For reasons the chronicles do not detail, successful flattery, the elimination of a rival, the efficiency of his brutality, King Ahasuerus advanced Haman. One day, in the throne room, the king halted a report. "Haman," he said. Haman knelt. "My king, I am bored of these princes. They are slow. You are fast. I have decided your seat will be above all of theirs. You will be Grand Vizier." Ahasuerus removed his signet ring, the engraved agate cylinder bearing the royal seal, Persia's winged lion, the instrument of executive power. He tossed it to Haman, who caught it with surprising agility. "What you decree, I will seal. Now, deal with these reports. I am going hunting." Haman rose, the ring in his hand. It was heavy. It was the weight of the empire. And he felt a surge of power so intense it was almost sexual. It was not only power, it was validation. Proof of his superiority. And with this power came a new law. A small, petty law, born of ego. Haman, now Grand Vizier, went in and out through the king's gate 10 times a day. And every time he saw the minor officials, the petitioners, the scribes. They bowed, yes, but it was not enough. His new status demanded more. The king, at Haman's prompting, commanded that all the servants who were at the king's gate should kneel and bow before Haman. Not merely a respectful bow. Total prostration, face in the dust, an act of worship. It was a test of loyalty, not to the king, but to his favorite. And all did it. The sound of submission became the music of Haman's life, the whisper of robes, the dull thud of 100 knees striking pavement, the sound of foreheads touching dust. It accompanied Haman wherever he went, and it fed his swollen ego. All, except one, Mordecai, seated at the gate as always, in his post as a minor official, reviewing a cargo manifest from Tyre, did not move. The first day, Haman did not notice. He was too occupied admiring the sea of prostrated backs. The second day, he saw it out of the corner of his eye, an old man sitting. A stain in the perfection of his power. He frowned, but went on. The third day, the other gate servants, nervous at this blatant disobedience, approached Mordecai. "Mordecai, are you mad?" a scribe whispered beside him, without lifting his gaze from the ground. "It's Haman, the Grand Vizier. Bo, you'll bring ruin on all of us." Mordecai lifted his eyes from his tablet. "I am busy with the king's work," he murmured. The fourth day, Haman passed and Mordecai ignored him again. Anger began to burn in Haman's chest. The fifth day, the gate servants returned to Mordecai. "Please, old man, why do you break the king's command? Why do you endanger all of us for your pride?" Mordecai sighed. He set down his stylus. He looked at them. At last, he told them the reason. It was not a matter of politics. It was a matter of identity. "I cannot," he said softly. "I bow to the king. I give the king honor and service. But to prostrate myself, to worship, that is only for my God." He paused and added the fateful words. "And besides, before that man, I have told them that I am a Jew, and he is an Agagite." For Mordecai, it was impossible. It was a betrayal of his history, his God, his very being. His spine, forged by thousands of years of covenants, refused to bend before the seed of Amalek. The servants did not understand the history. They understood only the danger. And perhaps they saw an opportunity to gain favor. They ran to tell Haman. "My lord vizier," the scribe said, prostrating himself so low he ate dust, "the man who refuses is Mordecai the Jew. He says his law forbids him to bow before you. We want to see whether his words will stand." Haman, full of his own importance, went to the gate the next day specifically to see it for himself. He walked slowly. The sea of backs prostrated before him. The whisper and the thud. And there, like a solitary rock in low tide, like a broken tooth in a perfect smile, was Mordecai. Seated, reading his tablet, Haman stopped. He stood directly in front of Mordecai. The silence tightened. The air smelled of dust and Haman's lotus cologne. Mordecai looked up. Their eyes met. In Haman's gaze there was an icy fury demanding submission. In Mordecai's there was no challenge. No fear. There was nothing. There was a quiet conviction, an immovable certainty, which Haman interpreted as the worst contempt. Haman's reaction was volcanic, but it was not a hot, swift anger. It was a cold, deep rage, a narcissistic wound that instantly festered. He felt humiliated. He felt seen. This insignificant Jew, this dust at the gate, had looked at him and judged him unworthy. And for a man like Haman, whose entire existence was built on the worship of others, humiliation was worse than death. He turned and walked away. His pride was so pathological, his contempt so vast, that the idea of simply punishing Mordecai seemed to him a small thing. To kill one man? He thought, his mind racing with hatred. To hang this old man? It is not enough. The stain will not be erased. If this man, Mordecai, refuses to bow because he is a Jew, then the problem is not the man. The problem is his people. His hatred, fed by the ancient enmity of the Agagites, found its target. If Mordecai's identity was the source of his defiance, then Haman would erase that identity from the face of the earth. He would destroy them all. The genocidal plot was born in that moment. Haman began to plan with the terrifying meticulousness of a bureaucrat. It could not be an impulsive act of rage. It had to be an act of administration. First, he needed a date. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Haman summoned his astrologers and diviners to a dark chamber in his palace, thick with the smoke of sandalwood incense. He ordered that the pure be cast, the lot. A terracotta die, an inscribed tablet, cast for the day, he ordered. The diviner cast the pure. The 3rd day of Nisan, my lord. It is not auspicious. Again, the 10th day. Neither. Cast for the month, Haman growled. They cast the pure day after day, month after month. And the lot did not fall. The 2nd month, Iyar. The 3rd, Sivan. Haman's frustration grew. Did not even fate obey? Until finally, the lot fell in the last month of the year. The 12th month, the month of Adar. The 13th day. Almost a year. Fate was giving Haman almost a year to prepare his holocaust. Haman smiled. This was better. Terror would be sweeter the longer it lasted. With the date set, Haman went before the king. He entered the throne room, prostrating himself with feigned humility. "Light of the world, King of kings," he began, his voice honeyed. "Your empire is perfect. Almost. There is, an irritation. A certain people." Ahasuerus lifted an eyebrow, bored. "The Armenians again? Send the 10th satrap." "No, my king. Worse. An internal people, scattered and dispersed among all the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. They are like sand in the gears." He paused. "Their laws are different from those of every people. They do not eat our food. They do not honor our festivals. And," here he lowered his voice, "they do not keep the king's laws." It was a lie, but an effective lie. They are disloyal. They are assist. And to the king, he concluded, it profits nothing to let them live. Ahasuerus yawned. "They are many. It would be an administrative disaster. Costly." Haman smiled. He had expected this. "If it pleases the king, decree that they be destroyed. And he paused dramatically. "I will weigh out 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who manage the treasury, to be brought into the king's treasuries." Ahasuerus's yawn froze. 10,000 talents of silver. An astronomical sum. Enough to finance the war against Greece he was planning. Haman was willing to pay out of his own pocket for the annihilation of an entire people. Ahasuerus removed his signet ring. He gave it to Haman. "The silver is given to you," the king said indifferently, "and likewise the people, to do with them as seems good to you. See to it. Do not trouble me with the details. Now, bring me the dancers." With that casual sentence, millions of lives were condemned. Haman wasted no time. He summoned the king's scribes. He dictated the letter. The smell of ink and new parchment filled the room. His voice was monotonous, legal, and brutal. "To all the satraps, governors, and princes of the 127 provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to seize their goods." The decree was sealed with the king's ring, a law of the Medes and Persians, which could not be revoked. The couriers, the efficient Persian postal service, mounted on the swiftest horses, departed from Susa in every direction. The empire was efficient in its administration, and now that efficiency was put in the service of genocide. In Susa, the decree was posted first. Haman and the king sat down to drink, satisfied with the day's work. But the city of Susa, upon reading the order, was aghast. While this darkness was being conceived, a thread of light had been woven, a seed of providence planted and forgotten. Sometime earlier, shortly after Esther's coronation, Mordecai was at his usual post at the gate. It was night. Most petitioners had gone. He was reviewing a cargo manifest. The air smelled of extinguished torches and the coolness of night. Two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, guards of the gate, were furious with the king over some unrecorded offense. A denied promotion, a perceived insult. They thought they were alone. Mordecai, always vigilant, always listening, heard them whispering. They spoke in the dialect of Tarsus, a tongue they believed no one else at court understood. But Mordecai understood it. This very night, he heard Bigthan whisper, "When he brings the wine, the dagger is in my boot. I will open the door to the chambers." 2 blows, Teresh replied, "and we will disappear into the chaos. The empire will crumble." Mordecai's dilemma was immediate. Did he owe loyalty to this pagan king? The man who had abducted his cousin? The man who embodied the empire that had destroyed his homeland? "What do I do?" he thought. "A dead king is chaos. And chaos is always bad for the Jews. And, Esther. What will become of Esther if the king dies?" He made his decision. He ran to the house of the women. He could not enter, but as a relative of the queen he could send an urgent message. He informed Esther. Esther, using her newly gained access, went before the king. It was the first time she went without being summoned, trembling with fear. "My king," she said, prostrating herself. "A report has reached me. From Mordecai, my kinsman who sits at the gate. He says that Bigthan and Teresh plan to lay hands on you tonight." An investigation was made. The plot was real. The 2 eunuchs were arrested. Under torture, they confessed. They were hanged on a gallows. And the act, as was customary, was duly recorded. A scribe, in a dusty room of the royal archives, dipped his pen in ink and wrote in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings. On such a day, such a month, Mordecai, a Jew, uncovered a plot by Bigthan and Teresh to assassinate the king. The book was closed. It was placed back on a shelf. And it was forgotten. The king was safe. Mordecai received no reward. Life went on. But the seed of providence, the recorded act of loyalty, lay dormant, waiting for the darkest night. The posting of Haman's edict fell upon the Jewish community of Susa like a death sentence read aloud. It was not a whisper. It was an act of bureaucratic terror. The king's heralds, in their official robes and with powerful voices, unrolled the scrolls in the public square at the foot of the king's gate. They read the order in Persian. They read it in Aramaic. They read it in Elamite. The morning air, which smelled of hot bread and fresh melons from the market, seemed to freeze. Merchants stopped their scales. Women returning from the well dropped their jars, and the sound of pottery shattering was the first noise to break the stunned silence. Then the reading continued. To destroy, to kill, and to exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, in one day, and to seize their goods. There was a moment of collective silence. A silence of disbelief. Had they heard correctly? And then it broke. It was not weeping. It was a howl. A sound that did not seem human. A collective lament that rose from the square and spread through the alleys of the Jewish quarter like a plague. Men and women in the square screamed. They tore their garments, not as a symbolic gesture, but with the fury of despair, ripping the coarse cloth with their nails. Mothers holding their children pressed them to their chests, staring at the Persian soldiers on guard, their faces now transformed from protectors into future executioners. They ran to their homes, took the cold ashes from their hearths, and flung them over their heads. The air filled with a gray, bitter dust that smelled of death and the end of everything. The fast was immediate. Food became unthinkable. Bread would have turned to ash in their mouths. Mordecai, at his post at the gate, heard the reading. He did not scream. Not at first. He stood frozen. The world faded into a high, ringing hum. Haman's face, smiling with arrogance that morning, floated before his eyes. My pride, he thought. My refusal to bow. I have brought this upon my people. My God, what have I done? His guilt was an ocean threatening to drown him. But beneath the guilt, there was rage. He stood up. Slowly, methodically, he took the fine linen robe of his official post, a gift from the king for some minor service, and with a single motion tore it from top to bottom. The sound of ripping cloth was his first declaration. He left the king's gate, walked to his house amid the chaos, opened a chest, and drew out a rough, painful cloth made of black goat hair. Sackcloth, the fabric of the deepest mourning. He stripped off his garments and put it on. The sensation was a shock. It was like dressing in sand and glass. Every movement scraped his skin. It was a physical pain that could scarcely match the pain of his soul. He covered his head with the ashes of his own home. And he walked back. He passed through the alleys where Jews wept, huddled in their doorways. And he walked to the center of the city, directly before the king's gate, where his lament could not be ignored. He stopped there, a gray and black figure against the white marble of the gate. And then he lifted up a cry, great and bitter. It was the sound of a broken heart. It was the cry of a father for his condemned children, the cry of a leader for his people, the roar of guilt and despair of a man who felt responsible. It was an animal sound, a howl that pierced the palace walls, crossed the perfumed gardens, and reached the queen's chambers. Inside the palace walls, in the royal house, Queen Esther lived in her silk bubble. She was in her chambers on the 30th day of her silence, 30 days without being summoned by the king. Her world had shrunk to those rooms. The air smelled of almond oil and the roses of the private garden. She was being attended by her maid servants, who were trying to comb her long dark hair. And then she heard it. A distant sound beyond the gardens, beyond the walls, a howl of pain. "What is that noise?" she asked, irritated. "It sounds like a trapped animal." Her maid servants glanced at one another, nervous. "It is nothing, my queen. The wind." But the sound returned, louder, a sustained lament. Esther rose and went to the balcony. The city of Susa stretched beneath her. And from the square, before the great gate, she saw a disturbance. And she heard the cry clearly. "Someone is suffering," she whispered. Her maid servants and eunuchs, their faces pale, came to tell her. They had been in the courtyard and had heard the guards' rumors. "My queen," one said, trembling, it is Mordecai. He is at the palace gate." "Mordecai?" Esther's heart lurched. "He is in sackcloth and ashes." and he is crying out." Esther was deeply distressed. Her first instinct was that of a daughter caring for her adoptive father. But her second instinct was that of a queen. At the king's gate, she thought, horrified, in sackcloth, making a spectacle. She did not understand the cause, only the symptom. Her isolation was so complete that she knew nothing of the edict. She thought it was a personal mourning. Perhaps someone had died in the family. But to do it there, at the palace gate, was a scandal. It was a danger. It could bring the king's wrath down upon him, and upon her. It was a disgrace. Her first instinct was, to fix it. To remove the stain. "He cannot be like that," she said, her voice tight. "They will kill him for disturbing the king's peace. Silence him." She called her servants. She opened her own chests. She took out fine garments, blue linen, tunics worthy of a queen's kinsman. "Take these clothes. Bring them to Mordecai. Tell him to dress himself, to remove that sackcloth. To wash, to come in and tell me what is happening." The servants ran, but Mordecai refused them. When he saw the queen's eunuchs with the blue silks, his pain turned to fury. "She sends him silks, while death is written on the walls?" He shoved the fine clothes away with a gesture of rage. "I will not dress," he cried. "Not until God sees our affliction. Go back and tell her the world is ending." The gesture enraged and frightened her. What could be so terrible? Had he gone mad? Then she summoned Hathach, one of the eunuchs the king had assigned to her personal service, an older man with kind eyes whom she trusted. "Hathach," she said, her voice tense, "go. Leave here. Leave the bubble. Find out what has happened to Mordecai, and why. Do not bring me rumors. Bring me the truth." Hathach crossed the abyss between the two worlds. He left the perfumed opulence of the queen's harem, where the only sounds were the whisper of silk and the dripping of fountains. He crossed marble courtyards where the immortal guards stood motionless, their faces impassive. And he went out through the king's gate. The world struck him. The public square was no longer an orderly market. It was a chaos of terror. The air smelled of fear, of ash, of sweat. The sound was the worst, a sharp lament of hundreds of voices. He found Mordecai, a broken yet defiant figure, sitting in the dust. "Mordecai," Hathach said softly, crouching. "Queen Esther has sent me. She is distressed. She wishes to know what afflicts you." Mordecai looked up. His eyes were red from weeping. He saw the queen's eunuch, his only line of communication. He did not waste words. His voice was harsh with ash. "Haman," he hissed. "Haman the Agagite. Because of me, because I would not prostrate myself before him. Because of his wounded pride." He told Hathach everything. The genocidal plot. The date, the 13th of Adar. And he spoke of the 10,000 talents of silver. The proof that it was not state policy, but a personal purchase of mass murder. "He wants to kill us all the Jews." Hathach was pale. "They are only words, Mordecai. The anger of one man." "Words?" Mordecai shouted. He thrust his hand into his sackcloth and pulled out a rolled parchment, a copy of the death edict that had been posted in Susa. "Official paper. The king's seal. Give this to Esther," Mordecai commanded, pressing the scroll against Hathach's chest. "Show it to her. Let her read it, and charge her to go into the king. To plead for his compassion. To intercede for her people." Hathach, his heart frozen, returned to the queen. He ran through the corridors, the scroll in his hand like a venomous serpent. He entered Esther's chambers. She was standing, waiting, pale with anxiety. What did he say?" she asked. Hathach did not speak. He was breathless, his face ashen. He handed her the scroll. Esther unrolled it. Her hands trembled. It was an official copy. She saw Ahasuerus's royal seal, the winged lion. Her eyes scanned the Persian legal language she had learned to perfection. "To all the satraps, on the 13th day of the 12th month, to destroy, to kill, and to exterminate." And then she saw the word. "All the Jews?" The scroll slipped from her hands. The air in her luxurious chambers turned thin, impossible to breathe. The smell of nard suddenly made her nauseous. She swayed and grabbed a chair. Young and old, children and women, to seize their goods. "My people, me, Mordecai, the children who played in my street." The secret she had guarded so fiercely was now their death sentence. Her first reaction was not courage. It was pure, paralyzing terror. She stared at Hathach, her eyes wide. "Mordecai does not understand," she whispered, her voice strangled by panic. He does not know what he is asking of me. To go into the king. She sent Hathach back, a desperate answer, a plea for logic against madness. Go back, tell Mordecai, tell him that everyone knows it. Even you, Hathach, know it. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that there is only one law. Her voice broke. There is only one law for any man or woman who enters the inner court to see the king without being summoned. One law. Death. She paused, her hand at her throat. Except for the one to whom the king extends the golden scepter. Only that one will live. She looked at Hathach, her eyes filled with tears of terror. And I have not been summoned into the king's presence for 30 days. 30 days. In the precarious economy of royal favor, 30 days of silence was eternity. It was the equivalent of exile. It meant he had grown bored of her. It meant she was replaceable. It was Vashti's shadow. To go into him now, unsummoned, was not only a breach of protocol. It was political and literal suicide. It was the act of a desperate woman, and he hated desperation. She would be Vashti again. Hathach carried the message. He went back into the dust and the noise. Mordecai heard it, standing among the ashes. He heard the queen's logic. He heard her fear. He heard her 30 days. And his pain turned into a righteous, cold anger. 30 days? He thought. She weeps over 30 days while we weep over annihilation? The answer he sent back was the blow that would shatter Esther's armor of fear and forge the steel of her destiny. He looked at Hathach. Go back and tell Esther. His voice was hard as granite. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's house more than all the other Jews. Do not believe your marble walls and your crown will save you. When they come for us, they will come for you. The edict is for all Jews. And Haman, somehow, will learn of you. Or the king will grow bored of you and hand you over. For if you remain completely silent at this time, if you choose your safety over your people, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. It was a declaration of astonishing faith. Mordecai reaffirmed his belief. Salvation would come. The God of Israel would not abandon them. But then he added the personal consequence, the sentence for her. But you and your father's house will perish. You will be forgotten. You will be a footnote in history. You will be the Jewish queen who hid while her people died. And then, after the hammer, came the word of providence, the phrase that would pierce time, the question that was an answer. And who knows? Who knows whether for this hour, for this very moment, you have come to the kingdom? Hathach delivered the message. Esther received it in silence, in her chamber now dark. Hathach repeated Mordecai's words, one by one. Each word was a physical blow. You will not escape. You will perish. For this hour you have come to the kingdom. The silk bubble shattered. The perfumed air of her chambers rotted. She saw herself, not as a victim, not as a queen, but as an instrument. Her entire life reassembled before her eyes. The death of her parents, Mordecai's guardianship, her cursed beauty, her seizure by the guards, Heggai's inexplicable favor, the year of preparation, the night with the king, Vashti's crown. It had not been a series of fortunate accidents. It had been a path. A terrible path paved with loss and fear that had led her to this precise instant. Fear did not vanish. It remained. Ice in her veins, the taste of copper in her mouth. But something else was born beside it, resolve. The terror of death was eclipsed by the terror of irrelevance, the terror of failing Mordecai, failing her people, failing the hidden God who had placed her there. The fear of dying was replaced by the fear of living as a coward. She stood up. The transformation was invisible but absolute. The passive girl, Hadassah, who had obeyed the command to hide, died. And Queen Esther, the savior, was born. She summoned Hathach one last time. Her voice no longer trembled. It was low, clear, and filled with an authority she had never possessed before, an authority that did not come from Ahasuerus but from her destiny. Go and tell Mordecai. Gather all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. It was not a request. It was an order. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, neither night nor day. Let heaven hear our cry. I also, she added, with my maid servants, will fast likewise. It was a declaration of spiritual war. She would confront Persia's absolute power not with weapons, not with logic, not with pleading, but with the only weapon of her people, prayer and fasting. She paused, closing her eyes, accepting the destiny Mordecai had revealed to her. And so, after the fast, on the 3rd day, I will go in to see the king, though it is not according to the law. She drew one last breath and sealed her own sentence, her voice a whisper of steel. And if I perish, I perish. 3 days, 72 hours. In Susa, time forked, flowing differently for each player on the board of destiny. For Haman, it was 3 days of growing anticipation, of savoring his triumph. The morning's work, humiliating Mordecai, had been a glorious distraction, but the true work was the gallows. His servants worked day and night. The sound of their hammers, clang, 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 echoed through the valley, a rhythmic reverberation that punctuated the life of the city. It was the sound of arrogance taking physical form. Haman oversaw the construction, smiling, imagining the Jew's body swinging against the evening sky. He was joyful. For the Jews of Susa, it was 3 days of terror and supplication. Mordecai's order, passed in whispers throughout the city, had been obeyed. Susa became a city of silent mourning. In hidden homes, in secret synagogues, the sound of weeping was replaced by the feverish murmur of prayer. On the first day, hunger was a cry in their bodies. On the second day, thirst was a fire in their throats. By the third day, weakness was so deep that the murmurs became a collective silence, a vast, soundless cry directed toward heaven. They were placing their collective fate into the hands of a woman they could not even name in public. For Esther, in the palace, the fast was a purification by fire. Shut in with her 7 maid servants, who, out of loyalty or fear, fasted with her, the outside world faded away. The palace's luxuries became grotesque. The scent of nard in her chambers, once a comfort, was now suffocating, the smell of a perfumed tomb. On the first day, hunger was physical pain, a claw in her belly. Fear was her only companion. 30 days. He has not called for me. He hates me. He saw in me the same thing he saw in Vashti. He will send me to my death. On the second day, weakness brought a strange clarity. Physical hunger sharpened her spiritual focus. She saw Vashti's face not as an accusation but as a warning. She saw Mordecai's face, covered in ash. Fear was still there, a constant companion, but it no longer controlled her. She stripped away the identity of Esther, the compliant. The shell was burning away. On the third day, the fast ended. Physical weakness was profound, but her spirit was steel. Hunger had eaten everything that was not essential. It had eaten her fear of death. Only the fear of failure remained. She rose from the mat where she had been prostrate. Her knees trembled, but they held. The girl Hadassah and Queen Esther had fused into a single thing, an instrument. She stood. She called her maid servants, their faces pale and drawn from the fast. "Bathe me," she commanded. Her voice was low, but it no longer trembled. She did not choose a dress of mourning or one of supplication. She did not choose the white of innocence. She knew whom she was going to see. Ahasuerus did not respond to humility, he responded to power and beauty. She chose her royal garments. The full attire of the Queen of Persia. It was armor. The maid servants brought the silks. First, the inner tunic, of linen so fine it was almost transparent, dyed a pale blue. Then the outer robe, of Tyrian purple silk, the imperial color, so heavy that 2 women were needed to hold it up. It was embroidered with gold thread, forming patterns of winged lions and lotus flowers. They cinched her waist with a belt of gold plates inlaid with pearls. The gold was cold against her skin. They put on her soft leather sandals, also embroidered in gold. Then the jewelry, heavy bracelets on her wrists, pearl earrings that hung to her shoulders. And finally, her hair, brushed until it shone, was gathered up and crowned with the lesser royal diadem. She looked into the mirror of polished silver. She did not see Hadassah. She did not see Esther. She saw the Queen of Persia. She saw a mask of power, a creature of gold and purple. And behind the dark eyes, rimmed with kohl, the steel of her resolve was hidden. If she was going to die, she would die as a queen. When her preparation was complete, she left her chambers. Alone, she began the walk. It was the longest journey of her life. From the house of the women, a world of whispers and perfumes, into the corridors of power. Each step was an eternity. Her silk sandals made almost no sound on the polished marble. The silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of her own heart, a dull drum that drowned out every other sound. If I perish, She passed the palace guards, the immortals, in their embroidered robes, their spears tipped with silver. They stood at every doorway, motionless as statues. Their dark eyes followed her. They knew the law. They watched their queen, arrayed in all her glory, walking toward a place to which she had not been summoned. They watched a dead woman walking. Her mind raced. Mordecai in the ashes. 30 days of silence. Vashti, vanished. The law. Death. If I perish. She reached the great corridor that opened onto the inner court, the court that led directly to the throne room. It was an open-air space, a vast square of white marble beneath the blazing sun. And she stopped, right at the threshold, in the last strip of shadow. There, across the open court, beneath a canopy of gold, sat he, Ahasuerus, seated on the throne of his kingdom, a colossal structure of ivory and gold elevated upon steps of silver. He was dressed in all the terrifying majesty of his power. He was not alone. He was holding audience, surrounded by princes, including Memucan, the one who had condemned Vashti, counselors, and guards. He was dictating affairs of state. Esther stepped out of the column's shadow and into the sunlight. The sun struck her. The white marble beneath her feet was blinding. And she stood still. The world stopped. A counselor, halfway through a sentence about Egypt's taxes, fell silent. Scribes froze their pens. The buzzing of flies in the heat of the court seemed to amplify. The only sound was the drip of a fountain in the court's corner. Esther did not move. She simply stood there, a figure of beauty, royalty, and defiance, violating the law by her mere presence. Ahasuerus looked up, irritated by the interruption. His gaze swept the court, and landed on her. He saw her, Esther, his queen, where she had no right to be. The king's first reaction was a surge of fury. Who dares? His face began to flush. It was Vashti again, another queen defying his will, interrupting affairs of state. A violation of the law. His hand moved instinctively toward the arm of his throne, a signal for the guards to act. But then his anger collided with curiosity. He saw that she was not defiant Vashti. He saw Esther, pale as the marble beneath her feet from the 3-day fast. He saw that her eyes, normally calm, were huge and fixed on him. He saw her beauty, magnified by the royal garments and the pallor of her face. He saw terror in her posture, but also the stillness of her resolve. 30 days without seeing her. And now she was here, risking her life. The politician in him was furious. But the man, the lover of drama, was intrigued. What could be so important as to risk her head? The tension stretched to the breaking point. Esther felt her knees give. The sun, the fear, the hunger, her vision began to darken at the edges. She was about to faint. And then, slowly, Ahasuerus moved his arm. He lifted the heavy golden scepter in his hand. The throne room held its breath. Memucan watched, pale. The king extended the scepter toward her across the court. The sign of life. Breath returned to Esther's lungs in a trembling gasp. She took a step, then another. Her legs felt like lead. She crossed the court that had been her corridor of death. The marble was hot beneath her sandals. She approached the throne, climbed the steps, and touched the tip of the golden scepter. The metal was cold, cold as the death she had just escaped. It was the touch of life. The king spoke, his voice now filled with expansive magnanimity, delighted by the drama she had created. He was the merciful king. What is it, Queen Esther? And what is your request? He gestured to the court, a smile blooming on his face. Speak, even to half the kingdom it shall be given you. It was the moment. The Jews of Susa were fasting for this answer. Mordecai waited at the gate. But Esther, in her newly found wisdom, looked at the counselors. She saw Memucan there. She saw the cold eyes of the politicians around her. She knew it was not the moment. The king was surrounded. His offer was public, but shallow. It was a boast. And Haman, the cause of everything, the man with the king's ring, was not there. She could not accuse the Grand Vizier in his absence. It would be seen as feminine hysteria, a courtier's quarrel. It would be her against the second most powerful man in the empire. And she could not risk the king dismissing her plea on a whim. She needed control. She needed time. She needed to set a trap. She drew a deep breath. She looked at the king, not with her earlier audacity, but with sudden submission. If I have found favor in the king's sight, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, and if it please the king. My request is small. The king leaned forward, intrigued. "Let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for him." The request was genius. It was so unexpected, so trivial in appearance, that it disarmed everyone. The king, expecting a plea for lands or a political plot, found himself invited to dinner. And the second part of the blow, and Haman. In a single sentence, Esther had done three things. She had intrigued the king to the extreme. She had isolated her enemy, publicly elevating him before the fall. And she had bought time by moving the battlefield from the king's public court to her own territory, the private banquet. "Haman," the king said, confused but delighted. "A mystery. Bring Haman quickly," he roared to a servant. "To do what Esther has said." That night, the first banquet took place. The room was small, intimate, luxurious. The air smelled of nard, saffron, and spiced wine. Only 3 people, reclining on purple cushions, playing a deadly game. The tension was unbearable, but it was hidden beneath smiles and the flow of wine. The thoughts of the 3 players were separate worlds. Ahasuerus was relaxed, intrigued, drinking. What does she want? She risked her life not for a kingdom, but to invite me to dinner. And why is Haman here? It must be something only the 3 of us can discuss. Perhaps she wants a favor for Haman. A province for one of his sons. Good. She is playing the game. I like it. Haman was euphoric. "I have arrived. I am the only prince in the empire important enough to dine alone with the king and queen. Not even the king's brothers are here. Clearly, the queen also recognizes my power. She probably wants to make sure I do not denounce her for being friendly with that Jew at the gate. Mordecai will die tomorrow, and my triumph will be absolute." Esther was terrified but focused. She barely touched the food. Not yet. The king is too relaxed. Haman is too confident. If I speak now, the king may see it as a courtier's quarrel. The king's heart is not yet prepared. I need to tighten the knot. I need the king to be desperate to know. They drank wine. The king, impatient, asked again. "Now, Esther, we are alone. The banquet is magnificent. What is your request? It shall be granted you. What is your petition? Even to half the kingdom, it shall be done." Esther looked at him, her eyes inscrutable. She feigned weakness, placing a trembling hand on her chest. "My request and my petition are these," she said softly. "If I have found favor in the king's sight, my heart is so overwhelmed by your mercy today. The fear of approaching you has exhausted me." She lowered her gaze. "If it please the king to grant my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet I will prepare for them tomorrow. And tomorrow, with my strength renewed, I will do according to what the king has commanded." A second banquet. It was another masterstroke. Haman nearly floated with pride. 2 private banquets. The king, on the other hand, was completely hooked. A 2-day mystery. What could be so monumental? His curiosity now hovered on the edge of obsession. He agreed. The chess game continued. Esther had sacrificed a pawn, her immediate safety, to put the enemy king in check. But Haman's king was still on the board, and the gallows for Mordecai, tall and dark, waited for its victim beneath the moon. The fate of the empire, and of an entire people, hung on the hours of darkness between the 2 banquets. That night, 2 parallel narratives unfolded, one driven by human arrogance, the other by divine providence. First, arrogance. Haman left the first banquet. His body was saturated with wine and his soul with pride. He left the palace, crossing marble courtyards beneath a nearly full moon. The night air was cool and smelled of jasmine from the royal gardens. The scent mixed with the expensive lotus perfume in his own beard and the aroma of spiced wine clinging to his robes. In that moment, he was on top of the world. He was the happiest man in Persia. His inner monologue was a hymn to himself. 2 nights. Only the king, the queen, and me. Me. Not even the king's brothers were invited. The queen knows who holds the true power in this empire. She fears me, and she respects me. How could she not? The king has given me his ring. The queen pours me wine. The empire bows before me. He walked toward the great king's gate to leave the palace complex, his golden sandals tapping softly on the marble. And then he saw him. In the shadow of the gate, barely lit by a single torch sputtering on the wall, sat Mordecai. He was not in sackcloth. He had washed and put back on his minor official's tunic. He sat in his usual place, reviewing a clay tablet in the flickering light. Haman stopped. He waited. Mordecai did not rise. He did not tremble. He did not even look up. He simply made a mark on the clay with his stylus. That single act of silent defiance, the simple refusal to exist in his presence, punctured the bubble of Haman's euphoria. All the wine, all the joy, all the glory of the private banquet evaporated in an instant. The cool night air suddenly felt suffocating. Blood rushed to his face, hot and furious. He ceased to be the Grand Vizier dining with royalty and became again the man humiliated at the gate. He restrained himself. He would not make a scene. He would not shout at a Jew in the dark. It would be beneath him. He kept walking, but now his heart hammered with murderous fury. The wine in his stomach had turned sour. He reached his house, a palace in itself, a gift from the king. He burst in, his boots striking hard against the mosaic of his own atrium. His servants ran to meet him, but he shoved them aside. "Bring Zeresh," he shouted. "And my friends." Now, he needed an audience for his rage. He needed his humiliation witnessed, and then erased by flattery. He sat on his couch, and when his wife and his private counselors gathered, pale and nervous at the night summons, he strutted before them. He began his performance. He needed to remind them, and remind himself, who he was. "Do you see all this?" he said, gesturing to the gold, the ivory, the servants. "The king has given me the glory of my riches. And look at my sons. 10 sons. A strong lineage." His voice rose, growing frantic. "The king has advanced me. He has set me above all the princes and servants of the king. All bow down before me. And more still," he cried, his face now flushed. "Today, Queen Esther. No one else did she invite with the king to the banquet she prepared, except me. And tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king." He paused, his face darkening. The monologue of triumph collapsed. "But all this," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "all this glory, these riches, this honor, it all means nothing to me. Every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." His confession was pathetic. His happiness was so fragile that a single man, sitting in silence, could destroy it. His pride was not strength, it was a disease, a black hole that nothing could fill. His friends murmured, "Kill him, my lord. Ignore him." But it was Zeresh, his wife, as ruthless as he, who saw the solution. She was tired of her husband's complaints. She wanted action. She wanted her husband to be the man he pretended to be. "And why should it mean anything to you?" she said, her voice practical and cold. "Why do you let an insect ruin your banquet? You are the Grand Vizier. You are Haman. If he troubles you, crush him." "I will ask for his head tomorrow," Haman muttered. "No," Zeresh said. "Asking for his head is simple. It is private. Your humiliation is public. Your vengeance must be as well. This man defies you in full view of everyone. His punishment must be a lesson to all." She leaned forward, her dark eyes shining. "Let them make a gallows. A gallows 50 cubits high. 50 cubits, more than 20 meters. It was not a gallows, it was a monument. It would be the tallest structure in Susa, higher than the citadel walls. It would be visible from every rooftop, every alley. "Build it tonight," Zeresh continued. "And tomorrow morning, before the banquet, you go to the king. You are the Grand Vizier. He loves you. Ask that Mordecai be hanged on it. He will not deny you an insect. And then you can go in joyfully with the king to the banquet." The idea delighted Haman. The poison in his soul turned into an elixir. He saw the image. The Jew's body, a small black stain, swinging against the blue morning sky. A warning. The perfect punishment. "Brilliant," he exclaimed, his joy returning. "Prepare the gallows." He gave the order at once. Servants ran, and soon the sound of hammers striking wood echoed through the night, nailing together the beams of arrogance. Clang, clang, clang. An obscene sound floating over the sleeping city, a sound climbing the walls and reaching the king's palace. While Haman's hammers rang out. That same night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. He tossed on his silk cushions. The wine from Esther's banquet had turned sour in his stomach. But it was not indigestion. It was an agitation of the soul. "Why?" he thought. "Why risk her life just to invite me to dinner? And why Haman? Why wait until tomorrow?" The mystery gnawed at him. It was like a knot he could not untie. Esther had been pale. She had been afraid, but also determined. Haman had been too happy. His smile had been too wide. Something was out of place. He called for his servants, who were dozing in the corridor. "Bring the book of the records and chronicles of the kingdom," he ordered. Read to me." The servant's voice was a monotonous drone, exactly what the king wanted. He read about taxes. Quote. He read about harvests. Quote. He read about reports from distant governors. Quote. Haman's hammers, far off, were only a dull heartbeat. And then the servant read an entry from some time before. And it was found written that Mordecai, the Jew at the gate, the one Haman hates, that Mordecai, the servant continued, unaware of the shift, had reported Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, of the guard of the door, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The king sat up sharply. Sleep vanished, replaced by a sudden sense of imbalance. Memory returned, the assassination plot. The two eunuchs. His life had been saved. What honor or distinction was done for Mordecai for this? The king asked the servant, his voice sharp in the stillness of the night. "My king, nothing has been done for him. It was a monumental oversight. A stain on his royal honor. A cosmic injustice. This injustice had to be corrected. And it had to be corrected now." "Who is in the court?" the king asked. And at that precise moment, providentially, Haman had arrived. He had come at dawn, unable to wait, to be the first to see the king. He had come to ask the one favor he still lacked: Mordecai's death on the newly finished gallows. "My king, I have a request concerning the Jew Mordecai." But the king spoke first, his mind fixed on one thing. "Haman," the king said, his voice full of enthusiasm, "I have a question for you. What should be done for the man whom the king desires to honor?" Haman's heart lurched. "It's me. It has to be me." His inner monologue exploded with joy. "Last night's banquet. The king feels guilty for inviting me only at Esther's insistence. He wants to honor me on his own. He is asking me to design my own reward. His pride would not let him see any other possibility. For the man whom the king desires to honor?" Haman said, savoring each word, a smile of pure arrogance spreading across his face. "Ah, my king, bring the royal robe the king wears, and the horse the king rides, and the royal crown that is set upon his head." He wanted to dress like the king, ride the king's horse, wear the king's insignia. He wanted to be the king for a day. "And let the robe and the horse be delivered," he continued, "into the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. And let them clothe the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king desires to honor.'" The king listened, nodding. It was a magnificent honor. "Perfect. A wonderful idea, Haman." "Perfect," the king exclaimed. "Then hurry. Take the robe and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. And you shall be the noble prince to lead him. Leave out nothing of all that you have spoken." It is impossible to imagine the shock that ran through Haman. He could not speak. He could not breathe. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. My king, Mordecai?" he stammered. Yes, him. The one who saved my life. I have just read it. A brilliant idea, Haman. Go, now, before the city fully wakes." Haman could not refuse. He was trapped by his own words. The rest of the morning was a torture of ritual humiliation. Haman, the Grand Vizier, had to go to the gate. He had to face Mordecai, who looked at him in total confusion. By order of the king, Haman muttered, throwing the tunics at him. "Put them on." The silence between the two men, while Haman, his hands trembling with rage, clothed his mortal enemy in the king's robes, must have been deafening. Then the parade of shame. Haman took the reins of the king's horse and led Mordecai through the main square of Susa. And worse still, he had to shout. He had to shout the words he had written for himself, again and again, his voice breaking with humiliation. "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king desires to honor." The people in the square, who the day before had read the death edict for all the Jews, must have watched in absolute confusion. When the torture ended, Mordecai simply dismounted. He took off the royal garments. Haman did not walk. He ran. He ran to his house. He told Zeresh, his wife, and his friends what had happened, the nightmare, the humiliation. And Zeresh, who the night before had been so practical and cold, was now pale with fear. The hour of judgment had come. Haman was led to the second banquet like an ox to the slaughter. The room was the same, small, intimate, luxurious. The air smelled the same, nard, saffron, spiced wine. Esther was already there, reclining on her couch. She was calm. It was an unnatural calm. She had fasted. She had prayed. And though she did not know what had happened that morning with Mordecai, she could feel that the balance of power in the universe had shifted. Then King Ahasuerus entered. He was in an excellent mood. He had corrected his oversight. He had honored the man who saved his life. He had exercised his power justly. Now he was ready for Esther's final revelation. "Haman," the king boomed. "You look pale. Too much honor this morning? The wine will do you good." Haman tried to smile. It was a dreadful grimace. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the king drinking. At last, Ahasuerus tired of the game. His curiosity, stoked by 2 days of mystery, was at its peak. He set down his cup with a thud. "Now, Esther, enough mysteries." His voice was warm, indulgent, but edged with royal impatience. "We are alone. I have come, as you asked. Haman has come, as you asked. Now, speak." He reclined, expansive. "Whatever your request is, Queen Esther, it shall be granted. And whatever your petition, I swear it, even to half the kingdom, it shall be done." Haman shrank. "Half the kingdom? It's a coup. She wants power. She wants my position." Esther lifted her gaze. And for the first time, she let the king see the anguish beneath the calm. "The moment is now," she thought. "The fast is over. Mordecai is at the gate. My people are waiting. My God, give me the words. If I have found favor in your sight, O king," she began, her voice vibrating with controlled emotion, "and if it please the king." She paused. "I do not want half your kingdom," she whispered. "My request is simpler. Let my life be given me at my petition." The smile vanished from Ahasuerus's face. The air chilled at once. "My life?" he repeated, confused. "What do you mean? Is it a threat? Who dares threaten you?" "My life, O king," Esther said, her voice gaining strength, "and my people at my petition." "Your people?" The king was stunned. He sat upright. This was not a game. Esther leaned forward. "For we have been sold," she said, "I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." The word sold struck Ahasuerus like a whip. Sold, a financial crime, a betrayal, his queen, in his own palace? "What madness is this?" he growled. She continued, anticipating his next question, her logic cold and sharp. "If we had been sold as male and female slaves, if it were only slavery, I would have kept silent. I would not have troubled the king with so trivial a matter. Though the enemy, the perpetrator, could not compensate the loss to the king." King Ahasuerus sprang to his feet. Wine spilled from his cup, staining the silk carpet like blood. His face, the same face that had turned purple with rage against Vashti, was now white with fury. A plot against his queen. A plot against him. A loss to the king. Someone had sold his property, his queen, for destruction. He turned toward her, his voice a thunder that shook the small room. "Who is he, and where is he? Who is the man whose heart has filled him to do such a thing? Who has dared?" It was the moment for which Hadassah had been born. Haman was paralyzed, frozen on his couch, his cup halfway to his lips. "No, no, no, it cannot be. She does not know." Esther rose, slowly, majestically. Fear was gone, replaced by icy justice. She lifted an arm, her hand trembling, not with fear, but with wrath. The heavy gold bracelets on her wrist chimed. And she pointed. She did not take her eyes off the king, but her finger aimed straight at Haman. "The enemy and adversary," she declared, her voice ringing in the small room, "is this wicked Haman." Haman's world ended. He dropped his cup. The gold struck the marble with a dull thud, and red wine spilled across the floor, running toward the king's feet. Haman's mouth opened. A small, strangled sound came out. Ahasuerus stood motionless. There was a second of absolute silence as the king's mind, slow with wine but sharp with paranoia, connected the points. "Haman, the edict, 10,000 talents of silver. A certain people, the Jews. Esther is Jewish, the man who saved my life. Mordecai, the Jew, it is Esther's people. And Haman made me honor him this morning. And he built a gallows for him. He made me sign the death sentence of my own queen." The betrayal was so deep, so vast, the manipulation so complete, that Ahasuerus felt he was choking. Haman had not only tried to kill his queen, He had made him look like a fool. He had humiliated him. He had used the king's ring against the king. Ahasuerus was so full of rage he could not speak. The king stormed into the garden. Cool night air struck him. The air smelled of roses and jasmine. He grabbed a rose head and crushed it in his fist. Thorns drove into his palm. He has deceived me. His inner monologue roared. That Agagite dog. He used my ring. He used my power against me. To murder my queen. The only person in this palace who asks nothing of me. And the money. The 10,000 talents. It was a bribe to buy the life of my wife. He made me dishonor myself. He made me honor the man he was going to kill. The man who saved me. He stopped, breathing hard. Haman remained frozen. He knew he was dead. In one last, pathetic act of desperation, he threw himself onto the couch where Esther reclined. He fell at her feet, crawling, clutching her royal garments. "My queen, mercy," he whimpered, his voice high with terror. The smell of fear poured from him, sour, cutting through the perfume of the room. "Have mercy. I did not intend it. I did not know. I swear by all the gods I did not know it was you. Tell the king, save my life. I will be your slave." At that precise instant, King Ahasuerus returned to the room. His fury was controlled, ready to pass sentence. What he saw was his mortal enemy. The man he had just discovered was trying to murder his queen, prostrate on her couch, clutching her. Before Haman could even lift his head, the royal guards, always present in the shadows, moved. They knew that tone in the king's voice. They seized Haman by the arms and lifted him from the floor. Haman screamed. One of the guards drew a linen cloth from his belt and, as was customary with those condemned to death, covered Haman's face. He was no longer worthy to see the king's face, nor for the king to see his. Harbona, one of the eunuchs who served the king, stepped forward. He saw which way the wind was blowing. He hated Haman. Haman had been cruel to the servants. He saw his chance. "My king," he said, his voice clear in the stunned silence, "behold, in Haman's house." The king turned to him. "Stands the gallows, 50 cubits high, which he had prepared for Mordecai." He paused, connecting the final dot for the king. The same man who spoke good for the king. King Ahasuerus looked at the hooded, struggling figure of Haman. Poetic justice was perfect. He did not even think. His order was guttural, immediate, and just. Hang him on it. The guards dragged Haman from the room. They carried him through the city in a humiliating procession to his own house. They brought him to the courtyard where his wife Zeresh and his friends watched in horror. They bound him and hoisted him onto the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. And so, on the gallows of his own arrogance, Haman the Agagite met his end. That same day, as the sun was setting, the wrath of King Ahasuerus was finally appeased. The death of Haman resolved the immediate crisis, but not the fundamental problem. That same night, while the body of the Grand Vizier was cooling on the gallows he himself had built, King Ahasuerus, Esther, and the guards returned to the palace. The half-eaten banquet still sat in the room, the spilled wine from Haman drying on the floor like a bloodstain. Esther was trembling. The adrenaline of the confrontation left her, leaving her with a weakness that made her stumble. The fast, the terror, the accusation, it all collapsed over her. She sat down, hid her face in her hands, and, for the first time, she wept. These were not tears of fear, but of pure and absolute exhaustion. King Ahasuerus looked at her, his wrath soothed, replaced by a strange tenderness. This woman, this creature of silk and steel, had saved his life, and then her own. He had underestimated her, but the relief did not last long. The next morning, Esther woke with the sun, but also with the same icy terror in her chest. Why? Haman was dead. Then she understood. The edict was still in force. The bureaucratic machinery of the empire, once set in motion, could not simply stop. The law of the Medes and Persians, sealed with the king's ring, was irrevocable. The 13th of Adar was still marked for the massacre. Killing the author had not killed his work. The reversal of fate began immediately, but administratively. That same day, King Ahasuerus summoned Esther. The house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, he declared, his voice formal, with all its properties, its goods, and its slaves, I give to you, Queen Esther. Esther prostrated herself. It was a fortune, but it felt like ash. It was a house built on hatred, a palace that smelled of Haman's lotus perfume. A smell that now made her nauseous. And then Esther, finally feeling safe to reveal her full truth, played her last card. "My king," she said, her voice still weak. "There is something else you must know. About the man you honored. The man Haman hated." "Mordecai," the king said, nodding. "Mordecai," she said, taking a breath, "is my kinsman. He is the son of my uncle. My parents died. He raised me as his own daughter." The king went still. The final click. The last piece of the puzzle slid into place. The man who had saved his life was the father of the woman he loved. Mordecai's loyalty was not only to the throne, it was to her. "Send for him," the king said. Mordecai was brought. He was no longer the dusty official at the gate. The guards found him at his house, praying, still not knowing the outcome of the second banquet. They escorted him to the royal chambers. He entered. He saw Esther, alive, standing beside the king. His eyes filled with tears. "Mordecai the Jew," said King Ahasuerus. He stepped toward him. He did not ask him to bow. "You saved my life. And I gave you nothing. You saved the queen. And you asked for nothing. The man who hated you is dead, hanged on the gallows he made for you." Mordecai did not react with joy. He only felt the weight of providence. King Ahasuerus took off his signet ring. It was the same ring he had given to Haman. The same agate cylinder that had sealed the death edict. The king wiped it on his own tunic, as if to erase Haman's touch. He gave it to Mordecai. "Haman's position is empty. It is yours now. What I sealed, you will now seal. You are the Grand Vizier of the Persian Empire." In a single day, Mordecai went from being a disgraced official sitting in ashes to being the second most powerful man in the world. Esther, in turn, in an act of brilliant politics, said, "My king, the house of Haman you have given me, is too vast for me. I place Mordecai in charge of it." With this, she gave Mordecai not only political power, the reign, but also economic power, Haman's vast estate. But the celebration was brief. Esther knew the clock was still running. That same afternoon, she again fell before the king, this time not as a strategist, but as a supplicant. Not in his private chambers, but in the throne room. She fell at his feet and wept, this time with tears of genuine terror. The edict. Time was running out. "If I have found favor," she cried, her words choked by sobs, "and if it please the king, let it be written to revoke the letters that Haman devised. The plot he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. How can I bear to see the evil that will reach my people?" she cried. "How can I bear to see the destruction of my nation?" The king faced a constitutional dilemma. His face darkened. "My queen, rise." He helped her to her feet. "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged on the gallows for stretching out his hand against the Jews. I have done all I can." He made a gesture of frustration. "But an edict written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, no one can revoke. Not even I. It is the law of the Medes and Persians. It is beyond my reach." Esther felt the ground vanish. Had she won the battle only to lose the war? It was then that Mordecai, standing by the throne, now dressed in the vizier's robes, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, the voice of an administrator, but edged with steel. "My king, you are right. We cannot revoke the law." He looked at Esther, then at the king. "But we can write a new one." The king stared at him. "What do you mean?" "The first law," Mordecai said, "gives permission to the enemies of the Jews to attack them and take their goods on the 13th day of Adar. We cannot erase that permission. But we can write a second law, a counter-law, that gives permission to the Jews, on that same day, to gather and defend themselves against those who attack them." It was a solution of legal genius. It did not annul the first law, it made it powerless. The king's face lit up. Chaos would be avoided. The law would stand. Right then, the king said to Esther and Mordecai, "Write to the Jews as it seems good to you, in the king's name, and seal it with my ring." Mordecai, now in Haman's position, summoned the king's scribes. The wording was crucial. It did not revoke the first, it nullified it in practice. It granted the Jews in every city the royal right, sanctioned by the king, to gather and stand for their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that would come against them, children and women, and to plunder their goods. He added the final clause, plunder their goods, to match the two decrees legally. The scribes worked all night. The smell of ink and new parchment filled the room. They sealed every copy with the king's ring, now in Mordecai's hand. The couriers left Susa at dawn. But this time there was a panic that there had not been with Haman's edict. Urgent and pressed by the king's command, Mordecai shouted. It was a race against time. Haman's edict had had months' advantage to reach the distant provinces. The new decree had to reach those same places before the 13th of Adar. The riders mounted the fastest horses in the royal stables, with orders to change mounts at every post, without stopping to sleep. This time, they carried not terror, but light and gladness, and joy and honor. Mordecai went out from the palace. He took off the vizier's tunic that had been Haman's and clothed himself in royal apparel the king had given him, blue and white, a great crown of gold, and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa, which had been shocked and confused, seeing the fall of Haman and the rise of righteous Mordecai, erupted. The Jewish community, which had been in sackcloth and ashes, came out of their houses. The sound of the shofar, ram's horn, echoed in the alleys, not as an alarm, but as a celebration. Months passed. The tension grew as the 13th of Adar drew near. The empire had two contradictory laws. It was a day of legal chaos. The enemies of the Jews, emboldened by the first decree and by hatred, had been preparing for plunder and massacre. The Jews, emboldened by the second decree and by the king's favor, had been arming. When the day finally came, the outcome was a total reversal of fate. In all the provinces, the enemies of the Jews gathered at dawn, ready to attack. But now, the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. All the satraps, governors, and the king's officials, the police, the local militaries, now knew who was in charge in Susa. And they did not want to be on the wrong side of the new Grand Vizier. So the king's officials helped the Jews. Those who had planned to massacre were massacred. Those who had planned to plunder were destroyed. The Jews gathered and defended themselves. But the chronicles record a crucial detail, repeated 3 times. They did not lay hands on their goods. Though the law allowed it, they refused. It was not a war of greed like Haman's, it was a war of survival. It was justice, not revenge. In Susa, the battle was fierce. The 10 sons of Haman, who no doubt had inherited their father's hatred and had tried to lead the insurrection against the Jews, were killed in the fighting. The next day, Esther made one last request of the king. It was a cold, political request. If it pleased the king, she said, let the bodies of Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. It was not cruelty. It was Persian politics. Haman had been a traitor. His sons, by continuing his struggle, were traitors. Hanging their bodies after death was the final public sign that the house of Agag was finished, its rebellion crushed, and the authority of the king, and of Mordecai, was absolute. It was an act of state to secure a lasting peace. The king granted it. On the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, the people rested. The slaughter was over. The terror had passed. The air of Susa, which the year before had smelled of fear, now smelled of feasts. The sound of weeping was replaced by music. Mordecai and Esther wrote letters to all the provinces, not as vizier and queen, but as leaders of their people. They established that those days were to be remembered forever. They were to be days of feasting and gladness, a time to send portions of food to one another and to give gifts to the poor. And they called this feast Purim. They called it so because of the pure, the lot, the die Haman had cast to destroy them. Because in the month that had turned for them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to a good day, fate had not been erased. It had been inverted. The lot Haman cast to determine the day of their destruction became the day of their salvation. The Chronicle of Esther concludes not with an open miracle, not with a sea parted or fire from heaven. It ends with politics. Mordecai the Jew was second after King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted by the multitude of his brethren, because he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace for all his seed. The empire continued. Taxes were still collected, but in its heart, a people had been saved, not by thunder but by a whisper. By the vigilance of a man who refused to bow, and the courage of a hidden queen who, facing absolute power and certain death, chose her identity, clothed herself in royalty, and dared to speak, discovering that, indeed, she had come to the kingdom for precisely that hour.